It's here! Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, the patch that we've been waiting for that was told to be absolutely chock full of changes has just arrived, and oh boy is it big. It is chunky. When they said it's time for the buffs, they meant it. No real nerfs at all, and as far as my main goes, which is the Druid of course, it is exclusively buffs, and a lot of them buff some of my favorite playstyles too. Ones that weren't even really that weak before. That said, I'm going to break down all of the Druid specific changes as someone who mains this class. We're going to break down each thing that they've done to it, but of course we'll also highlight the ones that are especially meaningful, the ones that change pre-existing builds, or potentially even make new builds more viable than they were beforehand, and at the end we'll break down how this has affected Druid as a whole. All that said, let's get right down into it, starting with the basic skills, and we have more or less gotten buffs to everything but Stormstrike, including buffs to our Spirit Generation as a whole, which is fair because Stormstrike is in general the strongest one of the basic skills, so it makes sense that it'd be left behind, and our Spirit Generation is arguably one of our weaker aspects, so buffing that is quite nice in general. Earth Spike has gotten a slight base damage increase, a 10% Spirit Generation increase, and Fierce Earth Spike has had its Fortified Generation doubled. This is quite nice for the Pulverized build. It's nothing necessarily groundbreaking, which is funny because that build exists to break the ground, but this is just a nice change. Wind Shear has had its base damage increase slightly as well. It's not bad, but not major either. I don't think this is generally going to be anyone's favorite basic skill, but it is still quite usable. Claw had a few changes, which is really quite big. This is especially impactful because of the Crone unique weapon that bases itself around you using Claw as essentially your main damage source, doubling it up with Stormstrike. So Claw got its base damage itself increased by 10%, which is pretty big. The Spirit Generation increased by 10%, which again is very nice. The Wild Claw enhancement option that gave you a chance to attack twice has had the chances increased from 10% up to 15%, which is a 50% increase in that possibility, so that is absolutely nasty. The other choice, Fierce Claw, had its base damage increased from 10 to 15%, another 50% increase, which again is extremely massive. We'll go over the exact ramifications later, but essentially what you need to know is this makes any build using the Crone Staff just notably stronger. It makes Pure Werewolf stronger as well, which is really great for Druid's leveling options too. Maul had a 10% base damage increase, a slight Spirit Generation increase too, and the Fortify from Enhanced Maul has been increased by 50%, up from 2% to 3%, which is not bad at all. I won't make Maul meta really, but again, this is a nice buff to the Druid leveling experience depending on the build you want to use. After that, we move on to core skills. They did not touch Tornado at all, or Pulverize, or Landslide. The first two of course make sense as they are the pillars of the two meta Druid builds, but Landslide is less so. That said, Landslide is inherently strong as an ability in its own right. The builds supporting it in general though just weren't quite good enough around it, so it did get sort of side buffed in this patch as other parts of Trample Slide were actually improved. The actual changes then are to Lightning Storm, a crowd favorite ability. Enhanced Lightning Storm makes it so you can stop casting Lightning Storm for up to 4 seconds without losing the size increase, but now that is buffed from 4 all the way up to 6. Just really nice quality of life for any Lightning Storm build that you're going to use, which I'm generally quite a fan of. The Primal Lightning Storm's immobilize chance was also increased from 8% up to 12%, a 50% increase. Pretty solid in combination with the passive Bad Omen that gives you a 30% lucky hit chance when hitting a vulnerable, immobilized, or stunned enemy to spawn a bonus lightning bolt that hits them. Also the passive Electric Shock, which gives you up to a 15% lucky hit chance when dealing lightning damage to cause immobilize for 3 seconds. But if the target is already immobilized, it simply increases the lightning damage that's dealt to them by 18%, which is a really nice bonus. This is a pretty nice change overall for how it affects those passives. It's really good for Lightning Storm builds overall, I would say. After that, we also had changes to Shred, which is fantastic. About a 15% increase to the third hit damage just as a whole. The healing received from Enhanced Shred has been doubled. Now 2% life recovery on hit, which is massive for survivability in both the Poison build and also the Bounce Bolt Dashing Lightning build that's based around Waxing Gibbous. Raging Shred has had its damage increased by around 40%, which is massive for Poison builds too. Really cool to see that. And then Primal Shred's bonus critical damage increase increase by a whopping 50% as well, going from 20% in the old version of the game up to 30% in this version of the game. This is a crit damage multiplier, not additive, so that is insanely big for the Bounce Bolt build. There are no changes to anything in the defensive node cluster, but then for wolves, we have the cooldown reduced from 14 to 11 seconds, which is not bad at all, and the Ferocious Wolfpack lucky hit chance increased literally 4 times, from 10% to 40%, which means with wolves having 50% lucky hit chance by default, they now have a 20% chance on hit to give you Fortify, which is actually quite good. Unfortunately, companion AI still hinders their usability in the actual late game, but this should be great for companion-focused leveling builds for sure. Then we move on to the Wrath skill node cluster. Hurricane has gotten a massive buff, increasing the base damage from 97.5% up to 134%, very sizable. This is already a skill that's used in most Storm builds, so they've just had a nice passive buff as a result. But there is also a chance that this moves the aspect of the Tempest legendary into usability, the one that increases Hurricane's damage by 7 to 15% every second that it's active. Having higher base damage on Hurricane itself increases the potency of this effect by a fair amount. This will require some testing to be sure, but this may actually start worming its way into Storm builds in general as a result of this change. Rabies has its poison damage increased from 53% all the way up to 76%, which is almost a 50% increase. This increases the value of poison builds by a fairly decent amount even just by itself. Poison is getting a fair bit of love today, one of the bigger winners for sure. Then we move on to the ultimate skills. Cataclysm had its damage increased from 52 to 64%, a bit more than a 20% damage increase, which is pretty notable. It still likely won't be commonly used just because of the rampaging werebeast combos that we already have. Grizzly Rage is just really strong in its current state, honestly. Lacerate also had its damage boosted from 400% to 460%. This may make it a bit more viable in the Poison Werewolf build, but it won't really change anything for the other builds. Petrify, however, had its critical strike damage bonus increased from 25% to 30%. Again, this is a multiplier, not an additive bonus, so this is actually quite big. It's great not only for Earth builds, but specifically for Trample Slide, which is a good build, but wasn't quite in the high-end meta before today. This definitely does help, though. Then we actually had a buff to our mounted attack skill, Pummel, which is a bit hilarious to me that they are even balancing the mount attacks, but hey, I mean, I'll take it. Damage increased from 140% up to 180%, not bad at all, even for something I use quite rarely. Past that, we have buffs to 3 of our key passives, which is awesome as generally Earthen Might is considered the dominant choice here, the strongest across the board. Bestial Rampage, the shape-shifting key passive, has had its attack speed increase when in werewolf form for 2.5 seconds, increased from 20 to 25%. Its damage bonus from being in werebear form has also been increased from 20 to 25% as well, which is just a nice 25% increase to this key passive across the board. Probably not enough to make a mixed wolf and bear build quite strong enough yet, but effort is being made in that direction for sure. Then we have a buff to Nature's Fury, which is a very cool key passive. This has a 20% chance when casting a nature magic skill to cast a skill of the opposite nature magic type, but from the same skill node cluster. This one is mostly just used currently in Crone builds, but it's been increased by 50%. The chances of casting a bonus spell gone up from 20% before to 30% now. This is massive for Crone builds, and even past that, it may actually be enough to make mixed Storm and Earth builds properly viable, which is pretty exciting to see. Then finally, for key passives, Lupine Ferocity gives every 6th hit with a werewolf skill a guaranteed crit and increased damage, the bonus of which has been increased from 60% to 70%. Just a nice marginal upgrade to the key passive used most in both the Poison build and the Bounce Bolt Waxing Gibbous build too. Finally then, we have a few legendary aspect changes. First up is Runeworker's Conduit, which is a part of lightning builds generally. The flat damage of the lightning bolts that it summons after you get a crit has been increased by a whopping 40%. This should be a nice little buff for lightning builds really. The Mangled aspect that gives you a chance to generate 1 spirit when damaged in werebear form has had its chance increased from 20 to 30%, now up to 30 to 40%, which isn't bad, but this generally wasn't used aspect before, so it will require testing to know if it's even worth it now in pulverized builds. The Seismic Shift aspect that makes Earth Spike fire out in a line but give it a cooldown has had its roll range improved from the previous 2.5 to 1.5 second cooldown to now being 2 to 1 second cooldown, which is generally speaking a 20% improvement. And then we have the aspect of the Blurred Beast, a major staple in poison builds that has had its damage increased from doing 60 to 90% of poisoning damage when using Shred, all the way up to 70 to 100% of poisoning damage. This is just a nice marginal marginal increase for that. Those are all of the changes then for Druid, so how does that actually affect us as a whole then? What does this mean for the class going forward, for our already established builds, and possibly new ones that could crop up as a result of this as well? Well, first and foremost, the Tornado Werewolf build is still the strongest. There have not been any nerfs to it, and I don't think anyone else was buffed enough to make it really compete, though the lower end of the meta has absolutely been bumped up a good amount, and some builds that were a bit less viable before have become quite a bit stronger. In general, I would say that there are 3 big winners here. Any build that uses the Crone unique has gotten a major upgrade, which is the builds that are focused around basic skills, as well as the Trample Slide version of the build that also uses Crone, so watch out for these, and there are a couple of fun builds with this that are now just a nice chunk stronger as a result of these changes. I'm excited to retool my Trample Slide Crone build around this, and maybe I'll even get that to you guys sooner rather than later, I'm hoping so. The Bounce Bolt build, the one that's based around the Waxing Gibbous unique, Shred critical hits and lightning strikes, has gotten a very notable buff as well, which is awesome. I consider this generally the 3rd strongest Druid build before, and it has now gotten even stronger. Whether it competes with the main 2 now, I'm still not quite sure until testing has been done, but know that it is better now than what it already was. The Poison Werewolf build has gotten significant changes as well. The build has been in a bit of a dire state since they nerfed the interaction between the Blurred Beast legendary and the Toxic Claws passive, but this should help bring it back into a nice bit of relevancy. And then finally, the Lightning Storm build did get some buffs as well. It didn't get as many buffs as the other 2, but the buff that it did get was actually quite notable. All said and done, that is 4 builds that we already knew about that have been buffed notably today, on top of the 2 that are already meta, means that we likely have 6 viable endgame Druid builds that we now know about, which is nuts as a sentence to say. Not to mention they tried to buff mixed shapeshifting bear and wolf builds, as well as buff the concept of storm and earth magic mixed builds. That will require quite a bit of testing to see if it's quite worth it now, but those could both become another 2 usable builds with these changes. All of this to say, Druid got buffed in some fantastic ways. They didn't nerf any of the good stuff, they didn't remove any of our fun, all they've done is increase the power of the things that were underperforming a bit, both as far as builds that some Druids were already using, as well as builds that we weren't really trying because they just weren't good enough before. I am super happy with these changes all around. I think there are still some changes that need to be made before the Rampaging Werebeast and Direwolf builds actually get dethroned, and we can probably start using other ultimate skills and more builds, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that hopefully they will keep buffing the other ultimate abilities to make them equal like they've tried to do today. I love seeing just a page full of buffs from my main class, don't you? I hope you've enjoyed this breakdown of the changes to Druid in patch 1.03, and I hope you enjoy the next couple of days like I do, just trying out all these new changes to see what they all mean for us in the long run. There is a lot of potential here, and it's just so exciting. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.